in bar number 126353.
Good morning, Your Honor. Madeline Loeb, spelled L-O-E-B, bar number 173970.
All right, Ms. Weinmiller.
Good morning, Your Honor. Chris Weinmiller from Ms. Brophy. Weinmiller is W-I-N-E-M-I-L-L-E-R, and my bar number is 863177.
Ms. Maxfield.
Yes. Good morning, Your Honor. Lisa Maxfield here with Ms. Brophy as well. My last name is spelled M-A-X-F-I-E-L-D, and my bar number is 844337.
All right, and I wanted to bring up to the parties, I may need to end at about 4:30 today, unless that's going to create tremendous problems. So you may not know yet, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
I don't think it will for us, Your Honor. Or I think we have some law enforcement later this afternoon that if we had to move to tomorrow, it wouldn't be too much of a disruption.
Okay, all right.
Your Honor, could I just address that issue as well?
Yeah.
It's not a problem for us. In fact, I think to the extent that we can get our client out of the courtroom before, is it 4:40? If we could have our client out of the courtroom by 4:40, it saves them a transport. They can actually get her on the transport.
I see. Okay, all right. Go ahead.
I was just say we could, if we want to just plan to end at 4:30.
But why don't we just plan that, and you know, if it makes sort of see where we are right before that. But
okay.
that's what we'll plan on.
Sounds good.
Anything else to take up before we bring the jury in?
I don't think for us.
Okay, let's bring them in and we can go off the record.
Okay, we'll go off record. I'll mute the WebEx and get the jury.
right, everyone can be seated. Mr. Overstreet, who is the state's next witness?
The state will call Leland Samuelson.
All right, and Mr. Samuelson, we'll have you come up and go ahead and step into the witness box, but if you can stay standing, and my clerk will give you a nice.
I'll have you raise your right hand, please. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Then you may be seated, and you may remove your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll just ask you to state and spell your first and last name.
Leland Samuelson, Leland Samuelson.
All right, and Mr. Samuelson, there is water there if you want it, but whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Samuelson, where are you currently employed?
I am a forensic scientist with the Oregon State Police. I work in the Portland Metro Forensic Laboratory.
And what is your current role at the laboratory?
Yeah, I work in the firearms and tool marks section. So as a forensic scientist, primarily, I work in a section that involves the examination analysis of firearms and firearm-related evidence.
And how long have you been in that field?
I've been a forensic scientist for almost 24 years, and all but about 23 years. Well, 23 years of that has been spent as a firearms examiner.
Okay. And could you explain exactly what is it? What is a forensic scientist?
Yeah, so a forensic scientist is someone, an individual that has been trained in one of the scientific disciplines. Primarily what we are asked to do is do scientific analysis and testing using approved methodologies to perform testing analysis on evidence that has been related to the use of a crime. We will then take our findings, our notes, our observations, our documentation that we collect during our analysis. We form a report, and then we are able to present that to the court of law.
And before we get too far, I want to just ask you, did you, in this case, did you receive some shell casings for comparison?
Yes, I received fired cartridge cases.
Okay. And how many did you receive?
I received 2.
And were they similar?
Yes, they were.
Same brand, same caliber?
Yeah, they were 9mm Sig Sauer brand ammunition.
And before we get into actual comparisons that you may have done in this case, what's the required qualifications to get into your career field?
And so as a forensic scientist, all of us have to at least have a Bachelor of Science degree in one of the physical or life sciences. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry with a minor in physics. And once you, so you have to meet that baseline to be hired as a forensic scientist with the Oregon State Police. And then we all have the different functional areas that we work in. So as a firearms examiner, I had to complete a training program that is it's an official published training program. It's the training program I follow. It was written or produced by the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners. So that's an international association that sponsors training, dissemination of information related to firearms examination and analysis. So I did that training program. It takes about a year long. Part of it is working with a coach who was a kind of a journeyman forensic scientist, firearm examiner with the Oregon State Police. But then we do additional training by different firearm manufacturers, ammunition manufacturers. We attend training by other forensic organizations such as the FBI laboratory, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Laboratory. And then we also participate in continued training by AFTE, the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners.
And do you receive some sort of certification by going through that process?
What the Oregon State Police says is once you've done the training program, you then have to complete a competency test. So it's kind of a all-encompassing test that covers all the different training areas in the discipline that you've been training in. And when you pass that, you're issued I guess, a statement of competency by our quality assurance department. And then to maintain that proficiency, we also have to take annual proficiency tests as well within that discipline.
Okay, and so specifically, are you doing sort of a firearm, or I'm sorry, a shell casing comparison in some capacity, and then you're sort of being tested on that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and that's what you have to do that to maintain this level of competency?
Yes, we do. So that would have been part of the initial competency test is examination cartridge cases would be one component of that, as well as all the other different things we do as a firearm examiner. And then annually, there's several different areas of analysis or examination we do. So within our accreditation cycle, so our laboratory is an accredited laboratory by an outside organization. So every 4 years they come in and they inspect our laboratory, and we have to do a proficiency test in one of those areas every year. But within a 4-year period, we would at least do one continued on cartridge case comparison.
Okay. And you said you also received sometimes specific training from individual manufacturers.
Yes, we do.
Can you describe or name some of the manufacturers that you've received specific training from?
Yeah, I've actually participated in either training workshops by the Glock manufacturing company, Remington manufacturing company, the Colt manufacturing company, Sig Sauer Arms company, Springfield Armory company. And then I've also attended different tours of manufacturers such as Alchemy Arms, which is a manufacturer in Seattle. I've attended and toured the Ruger manufacturing plant in Prescott, Arizona as well, to see those manufacturing techniques.
Okay. Any other plants that you visited?
No, I think that's about all the ones I've seen.
Okay. So I want to turn towards what we're going to be talking about here, which is comparing these shell casings that you received at the scene, these two 9mm shell casings. Can you describe to the jury what the critical components are of a firearm that leave these, what I think you referred to already as tool marks? What is the piece of the firearm that you're expecting to leave these markings on shell casings?
Yeah, so a cartridge case, let me maybe just back up a little bit. So a cartridge is an individual unit of ammunition. Sometimes they're referred to as rounds. So that's what's loaded into the, let's just say, for example, a semi-automatic pistol. So the semi-automatic pistol has a magazine that holds anywhere from 10 up to maybe 17 rounds of ammunition or cartridges. So the cartridge, as its unfired form, is made of a cartridge case. It's loaded with gunpowder, and then a bullet sits on top of that. And then at the base of that cartridge is a feature called the primer. So the primer is a soft metal composition, and it contains a high explosive. So when the cartridge is loaded in the firearm, a firing pin strikes that primer surface, and it causes an explosion. And the explosion ignites the gunpowder, and the pressure pushes the bullet out the barrel. So the cartridge case itself is then actually extracted and then ejected from the firearm, and the firearm will reload the next cartridge in place, and then it'll just repeat that cycle every time I pull the trigger. So some of the key features that we look for on cartridge cases that have been extracted and ejected and left are the markings from the firing pin where it strikes it. So the firing pins will have, they'll have certain shapes that can lead us to identify what type of firearm that would have fired that cartridge. And then also when the cartridge is loaded, the slide comes forward and it seals that. And the sealing surface is called the breech. So it's kind of a metal surface that holds all that pressure in place. So when the bullet is going down, that pressure is being sealed. And it's a steel surface that's been machined. And when the cartridge is extracted, it's going to take up some markings left by that slide. If you can imagine, if you're a kid, if you ever played with silly putty and you pressed it on something and you peeled it off, how that soft material has then taken up some of the features of whatever you press it into. Well, that's kind of the relationship of the cartridges, which is generally a soft brass or nickel-plated brass metal, much softer than the hard steel of the slide. So that pressure takes up those markings of the slide, and the firing pin, as it ignites the cartridge, is going to leave markings on it.
Okay. And so essentially the shell casing that's left over after the firing, because it's a softer metal, it's going to sort of receive some impressions or markings from this harder steel of the slide of the gun.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's two levels of markings as we're looking at them and doing our examination. The first are what we refer to as class characteristics. So they would be markings that would be indicative of a wide, maybe variety of classes of firearms that could have fired that. For example, many firearms might use a circular shaped firing pin. Well, if we see a circular shaped firing pin on the cartridge case, and that kind of would eliminate maybe firearms that would have a square shaped firing pin, or a wedge shaped, or a bar shaped of all the different sizes. So those kind of features helps us kind of eliminate a lot of firearms. But there's also what we refer to as individual characteristics. So those are features that are going to be unique to that firearm that we would not expect other firearms to have those types of markings. And that's what we're looking at the microscopic level. So those are all markings that are left when the machining processes that go into making that breech or forming that firing pin are you going to be unique to that part of the gun. And if you were to make 10 firing pins in a row and you looked at those microscopically, they're all going to look different. And so they will leave their own individual markings of that.
And what are the components generally, or specifically to the Glock 17, Glock 19, what are the components of a slide and barrel?
The slide the slide actually, as it's formed, the barrel fits into the slide. So the slide will have a firing pin. It's going to have, which also is referred to as a striker. So the striker is basically it's held it's held in the rearmost position until you pull the trigger and it's released, and it comes forward striking the cartridge. So with certain firearms, they'll refer to them as a striker. Other ones, they'll refer to them as a firing pin. But actually, Glock specifically referred to as a striker, so I'll use that term. But there's also the inside the slide is the extractor, which is kind of a big claw-shaped tool that grabs a hold of the cartridge case and pulls that out, allowing it to be ejected out of the firearm.
And so if you have a slide and barrel, this complete slide and barrel with the firing pin and everything in it, and you were to put that on different frames in order to fire that gun, are you expecting to see the same tool markings regardless of the frame that it's on?
Yes. So the tool markings that we're concerned with on bullets would be from the barrel, and the slide on the cartridge case. Those are the parts that leave the markings. The frame of the pistol actually does not impart any of the markings,
okay,
except for one, and that would be the ejector. But that's that is a fixed tool inside the frame that kind of finishes that ejection of the cartridge case out of the gun. But that would be the only mark that would not be left by the slide.
is that really something that, if it left a mark, that is necessarily unique to that frame?
Typically, my experience, the ejectors do not leave really unique, identifiable marks. It's generally more of the shape and maybe the orientation of that. But that would not be something we could use to specifically identify a cartridge case to a particular frame.
Okay, so bottom line is you need the slide and barrel to do a comparison.
Yes.
And in your experience, the frame simply really doesn't matter, doesn't really leave you anything that helps you in your comparison.
That's correct.
Okay. So you stated you received these 2 shell casings, 9mm. On the initial just look at them, before you really get into the microscopic analysis, was there anything about the primer or the markings left by the striker that told you anything about these bullets?
Yeah, quickly I was able to just recognizing the shape of the firing pin and it's what we call the aperture, the hole that the firing pin goes through when it strikes the cartridge case primer. That those shapes were pretty indicative that they were probably fired in a Glock pistol. And there's a couple other types of guns that would share that same shape. But in my experience, Glock has been far and away the most prominent manufacturer that would use that shape. So I was initially looking at those. I thought, okay, we can eliminate a lot of guns, but this could have been fired in a Glock.
And in fact, in your experience, probably most likely fired from a Glock?
Probably, yes.
Now, were you provided a Glock 19 slide and barrel? Actually, I'm gonna start with the Glock 17. Were you provided a completed Glock 17 9mm handgun as part of this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you author a report dated September 5th, 2018, where you analyzed shell casings from that gun?
Yes, I did.
Now, by the time you got this firearm, this was a complete firearm, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall how it was secured, how the slide and barrel was secured?
Well, I received it after some initial examination had been done in our laboratory, but I took some pictures and noted how it was received and discussed it with our technician that was also working with me on this case.
Okay. When it came to you, by the time it came to you, did it have sort of a standard zip tie through it, or was it something else?
No, it actually had a orange plug that was stuck in the chamber.
And is that something that you recognize?
Yes, it is.
And what do you associate that orange plug with?
Portland Police Property Room routinely will put an orange plug in the firearms as they package them.
And was there a cut zip tie also included in that case?
Yes, there was.
Now, just in general, by the time firearms or firearm parts, such as a slide and barrel, make it to you, is it your expectation that any forensic collection of any other forensic evidence, such as DNA, fingerprints, things like that, that's already been done by the time it gets to you?
Yes, often that's already done.
And so is that because you're going to be handling and actually firing this gun? Is that part of the reason?
Yes, and primarily when you want to collect trace evidence, which is what I would consider like touching DNA and latent prints, you want to collect that as soon as possible before it's been opened and handled or touched by another individual, just to reduce the potential for contamination.
In your role, though, you're expecting that to have already been done?
Yes.
Okay. So in order to do a shell casing comparison, what do you need to do with the gun yourself in order to eventually compare it to the shell casings from the crime scene?
We do a very thorough examination of the firearm itself. So typically in our comparison processes, we look at our unknowns. For example, our unknown cartridge cases that have been submitted or fired cartridge cases. We do an assessment of those. We take some observations of that. Then if we receive a considered a known firearm that we're asked to determine if this firearm fired this evidence, we then take the firearm, we document the condition we received it in, we check for any safeties, any significant safety concerns that we should be aware of. We document the condition of the disconnector, the safety, all these other internal parts of the firearm. And then we determine if the firearm will have similar class characteristics as these unknowns. So can we, is this something that we should be examining further, or can we set it aside and eliminate it right off the bat? So if it's similar class characteristics, then we will take the firearm out to our range. We'll test fire it at our range, collect bullets, cartridge cases from that, and then we will proceed to do a microscopic analysis, a comparison of those known fired cartridge cases from our gun to our unknowns at this time.
And so as part of this case, when you received this full Glock 17, did you do that test firing and collect those casings?
Yes, I did.
And then were you able to then compare those shell casings to the casings that were collected from the crime scene?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And so first off, you said these class characteristics, the striking of the firing pin, did that at least match up, meaning it seemed to be the same regarding the make of the firearm?
Yes, yeah. So for my unknowns, I looked at the shape of the firing pin, the types of machining marks on from the breech, and then when I received the Glock, I knew that the Glock would have the same firing pin shape and have those same breech face markings. So it would be the same class characteristics at that point.
Okay. But then further into your microscopic analysis, were you able to determine whether these test shell casings that you did would match or did match the casings from the crime scene?
Yeah, so I looked at my knowns and I did an inner comparison of those and compared those to my unknowns. And what I found was that the unknown cartridge cases, the two submitted, were not fired in the Glock pistol that was provided to me.
At least through that slide and barrel.
Yes.
And you touched on this earlier, we talked about it a little bit, but is it possible that that lower frame could have been used in the crime that produced these two shell cases at the crime scene if it just had a different slide and barrel on it?
Yeah, that would be possible.
Now, did you also receive a Glock 19 slide and barrel as part of this investigation? And actually, did you receive an entire gun build kit as part of this investigation?
Yes, I did.
How did that come to you? Do you recall? Meaning, what did it look like when you first got it?
Well, it was a just use my notes for a second, but so it was basically it was as packaged by the Portland Police Bureau and submitted us was just a paper sack. Inside the sack was a Glock pistol case that had no other markings on it, so it was just a plastic case. And then I received inside a case was a plastic polymer 80 a jig. So it's like when I say jig, it's basically it's a device that would hold a firearm frame so that you could do some finishing work on it. I received a 10-round magazine. I received a cleaning rod, a bore brush, an invoice dated 12/24/2017 from ghostguns.com to Nancy Brophy for a complete black 80% build kit, polymer 80 factory Glock OEM. That was as stated on the receipt. I received a bag that had some various drill bits and tools to complete the machining of an 80% polymer 80 ghost gun. So it would be the parts to finish making it into an actual firearm. I received also some various Glock brand parts, including a trigger, connector, slide, stop, and then I also received an assembled Glock Model 19 slide, barrel, recoil spring, and guide rods with the serial number BERY 606, 9mm 9x19 caliber.
Okay, so still a Glock 9mm, but model 19 as opposed to what we just talked about, the model 17.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, but both of these slide barrels take 9mm ammunition.
Yeah, they're both 9mm Luger caliber.
So how did you test fire, or did you test fire this gun? I should ask first.
What I did with this firearm, because so this was submitted to us as what we refer to as a 80% manufactured firearm. For example, in this case, ghostguns.com would sell these components as a kit. You can buy them online, buy them through the mail order. It's not considered a firearm because it has not been completely manufactured. So what they do is they will sell this plastic firearm frame that has not been finished, and then they sell you a bag of tools so then you can actually drill some extra holes, do some machining of some of the parts, which are plastic, so they can be filed away fairly easily, or use a Dremel tool or some type of homemade tools to finish that. And then you install, as the purchaser, um, a Glock slide and barrel onto this finished frame, as well as all of the Glock internal parts, such as the trigger, the firing pin, and all those parts to assemble that. So when I received it, we had all these extra parts, but we have a reference collection in our laboratory of a lot of Glock pistols. So rather than go through all these steps to finish this 80% firearm, I decided I wanted to preserve that evidence as it was received, and I took the firearm slide and barrel with the firing pin, and I put it on one of our own laboratory reference guns. At that point, I could get test-fired cartridge cases from that slide and barrel that was submitted as evidence, but I didn't have to use any of the 80% parts that need to be assembled.
And so you put that slide and barrel on an existing frame, and then did you fire that gun for testing purposes?
Yes, I did.
And did you compare those shell casings to the shell casings that were collected from the crime scene?
Yes, I did.
In your opinion, did they match?
No, they were not fired in that provided slide and barrel from the 80% firearm.
Okay. So, as part of this investigation, you were only provided one complete Glock 17 9mm and this ghost gun kit.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Were you ever provided a third Glock 17 slide and barrel that was allegedly purchased on eBay?
No, I did not.
If you had that slide and barrel, would you be able to go through the same process and do a comparison to see if that third slide and barrel produced similar shell casing tool marks to the shell casings that were collected from the crime scene?
Yeah, potentially I could.
But you were not provided with that in this case.
No, I was not.
I want to have you look at States Exhibits 87 and 88. I'll show you first, since it's first in time, dated September 5th, 2018. Could you look at both those pages and tell us if that's your report?
Yes, this is a copy of it.
Okay. And this is for the completed Glock 17 analysis that you did?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm going to show you it's marked as States Exhibit 88, dated September 19th, 2018. Is that also one of your reports or a copy of one of your reports?
Yes, it is.
And that's for the ghost gun build kit where you did the analysis with the Glock 19 slide and barrel?
Yes, it is.
You know, at this time I move to admit States Exhibits 87 and 88.
No objection.
All right, 87 and 88 are admitted.
So, I want to ask you a couple of just kind of general questions about. Actually, I'm going to ask you something specific about some of your notes. You noted that the Glock 17, the complete Glock 17, as it came to you, appeared to be in a like-new condition, I think is the direct quote, like-new. Why did you use the phrase like-new?
Well, I can't establish, positively there's a brand new gun, but just looking at it and seeing lots of brand new guns, this gun had very minimal surface wear to it. It didn't look like it had been carried in a holster much, which tends to kind of wear the finish off. It didn't have any obvious signs of damage or scratches to it, like it had been dropped or been carried or used excessively at all. And it was fairly clean as well.
Okay. So if that gun had, say, been shot 10 rounds or less, would that also kind of fall in that like-new categories for you?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Now, in your experience and your training, specifically through Glock, when you test fire these, are you thinking that you're the first person that's actually fired these guns, even if it was considered new?
No, they're all test fired during the manufacturing process by the arms manufacturer.
You're saying all Glocks are test fired by the manufacturer before they're shipped out for sale?
Yes, they are.
So in that case, I guess there's really no actual new firearm, is that fair to say?
Right. They've all at some point have had a cartridge that's been discharged in them.
Okay, Mr. Samuelson, I don't believe I have any further questions for you. Thank you.
All right, cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just get a little water in my mouth. Good morning, Mr. Samuelson.
Good morning.
I'm Lisa Maxfield. I think we've met in earlier hearings.
Yes, we have.
I'm one of Ms. Brophy's lawyers. Let's talk just first generally about this like new phrase that you've offered up. With respect to the Glock 17, you noted that the gun itself appeared to be like new. And you're not saying it's not brand new.
Correct.
You're just saying it looked brand new, but you can't be certain that it's brand new.
Right. It's like when if you went car shopping and you go in the lot and you look at like, I'm going to buy a brand new Volkswagen Beetle, and you see one that's used, and sometimes they'll say like new or as new condition. Well, they at least have an odometer on them that tells you that it's not brand new. So firearms don't come with any counter system. So, they might look brand new, but it might have actually been used for a certain amount of time.
You noted that the bore cleaning brush appears to have never been used.
That's correct.
You noted that the owner's manual was still sealed and closed with the factory label.
Yes.
And every other thing that you noticed about that gun suggested that it had not been used. Is that right?
Yes.
So when you use words like possible, you're not drawing an expert conclusion that it had been used less than 10 times.
Right.
In fact, by all appearances, it had never been used.
Well, in my opinion, it looks like it had been used. If it had been used, it had been hardly used at all.
Did you see anything at all in that gun to suggest it had been used?
No, I did not.
Now, with respect to the slide and barrel that was found in the 19 gun kit, you noted that slide and barrel also appeared to be like new.
Yes.
And you actually observed that it still had the copper-colored grease on the rails, firing pin block, and other contact points.
Yes.
What is the copper-colored grease signal?
Well, the copper color is during the manufacturing process, they will use a copper colored grease just to ensure that it has a sufficient amount of lubrication on it when it goes to the first user. Typically most people or firearm users, as they use a firearm and shoot it multiple times, they're cleaning them usually with more of an oil-based process. It would not have that copper grease on it.
You testified that with respect to DNA swabs, you did not swab either of these weapons for DNA, is that right?
I actually was asked to swab the polymer kit for DNA.
And who asked you to do that?
It was requested by the Portland police investigators.
And did the Portland police ask you to swab these crime scene casings for DNA?
No, they did not.
And I think you testified that it would have been best to swab those crime scene casing as soon as possible after collection.
Yeah, it's my understanding they were swabbed prior to my analysis.
That's your understanding?
Yes.
What do you base that on?
Conversations with the DNA section of our laboratory. So
That they had swabbed these casings?
that I think that there was some discussion if they were swabbed that it would have been done beforehand and that they would have been able to analyze those if they were done.
You're certain that these were swabbed by the crime lab before they were given to you?
No, they were not swabbed by our laboratory before I received them.
Who were you informed had swabbed them before you received them?
No, what I'm saying is that there were some in our conversation logs that we maintain on the case, there are some questions about swabbing, and if it would have been done, it would have been done by Portland Police prior to our analysis.
You don't have any evidence at all that these had been swabbed or tested?
No, I do not.
Okay. But if it happened before it got to you?
If it did, it would have, yes.
Typically, casings, especially if there's the potential for DNA evidence, typically they would make it to you very last in the forensic science process, right?
Are you talking about for comparison to a firearm?
Well, okay, we have crime scene casings, and there's different kinds of evidence that we can derive from the casings. Is that right? Some of it would be like fingerprints, maybe.
Yeah, that's possible. Yes.
Okay. Another thing that maybe you could find on casings would be DNA.
Yes.
But if someone in the crime lab was going to test for fingerprints or DNA, that would happen long before those casings were given to you to be examined for tool marks. Is that right?
Yes.
And so someone within the crime lab or somewhere else in the process needs to sort of triage a piece of evidence to decide where it goes first for examination and where it goes last.
Yes.
And do you know who would have conducted that triage in this case?
In this case, it would have been done by our supervisor, but a lot of that triage is taken care of on our forensic request. So if an agency that does their own fingerprint examination or DNA collection, they're not going to ask to have us do that at our laboratory. It's assumed to have been done, and then they'll write on our instructions, firearms comparison only in that case.
And is that what happened here? It's just firearms comparison only?
Yes, on the cartridge cases that were initially submitted.
Okay. The cartridge cases that you examined, did they look like they were covered in super glue?
I'll just check my notes for a second. I don't have any note that they were, but I received them after IBIS examination was done. That's by our technician, so it's possible they could have, but I didn't observe it when I did my analysis.
You read Ms. Green's report before you did your analysis,
Yes.
and there's nothing in her report to suggest that the objects had been super glued?
Not that I'm aware of.
Would you know if that happened? Would you be able to see that?
Often we can if it hasn't been, depending on the process, but if they did use super glue, often it'll leave a residue that we can that's observable.
But no one at the crime lab observed that or noted that in the crime lab reports?
Not in the report, no.
Would you agree with me that as a scientist, you need to offer conclusions based on objective facts?
Yes.
And your job isn't to speculate?
Right, that's correct.
And it wouldn't be correct for you to draw conclusions without the evidence to support those conclusions?
That's true.
So when we use words like, is it possible, is that a speculative verb? Or is that a speculative word? Or is that a word that is a scientific conclusion?
Well, I think the words possible is appropriate when given to particular circumstances. Is one likely or less likely to occur, or is one possible, or one would be impossible to occur?
Well, let's talk we're going to talk a minute about possible doesn't mean likely or less likely, does it?
Not necessarily.
Okay. And could have doesn't mean likely or less likely.
That's true.
And potentially doesn't mean likely or less likely.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Let's talk first about the conclusions that your conclusions that rest on actual evidence. The crime scene casings were not fired from the Glock 17 slide and barrel that Ms. Brophy gave the police on June 2nd. Is that your conclusion?
Yes, it is.
And that's a conclusion that's based on actual evidence.
Yes, it is.
And that's a conclusion for which you are absolutely certain.
Yes, it is.
The crime scene casings were not fired from the Glock 19 slide and barrel found inside this gun kit. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And again, you are absolutely certain of that conclusion.
Yes, I am.
And you're certain of that conclusion because it's based upon actual evidence.
That's true.
You talked about the types of weapons that might create the tool marks on the casings that were found at the scene. And you said that a Glock would be one of those. And I think you thought it would be the most likely just because of how popular Glocks are. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's true. And at the time at which this that I did this analysis, we really have not seen a lot of other manufacturers at that time that produce those similar marks.
Okay. In an earlier hearing, you testified that the crime scene casings were fired from a 9mm Luger semi-22 automatic pistol. Do you recall saying that?
No, I do not.
Is a Glock a Luger? That's what I was trying to understand.
The cartridge cases in this case are the specific caliber complete title is 9mm Luger caliber.
And so if you did testify that they were fired in a 9mm Luger semi-automatic pistol, you're just talking about any pistol that could fire this 9mm Luger bullet? Is that what you were describing?
I don't think I'm following what you're asking, actually.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I'm not sure where this is coming from, and I don't believe you ever testified.
Coming from a transcript.
Well, I think it's being
All right.
mischaracterized.
Hold on. I'm going to have the jury step out for just a minute.
All right, for the jury.
All right, we are still on the record. Mr. Overstreet, go ahead and state your objection more fully.
Yes, Ms. Maxfield has been referring apparently to a transcript from a prior hearing, I would assume from this case, but she's talking about Mr. Samuelson previously testifying about a Luger, and then she even said a 22 caliber. Mr. Samuelson has never testified in this case about a 22 caliber gun. And so I think there's some confusion in the question. So what I'm worried about here is now the jury's hearing about something that I don't believe has been testified to in this case. Maybe he's testified at another case regarding a 22, and it's very misleading. The question itself is very misleading, let alone the answer.
Yeah, I'm willing to offer the transcript as evidence if the court is willing, but for the portion that I have asked this witness about, I can read it out loud, and I can actually show the witness part of the transcript that I was referencing. It could have been a mistake that he said Luger instead of something else, but it's in the transcript.
Just so I understand, the transcript from what? What is it? What is this earlier hearing that we're discussing?
It's the destruction of evidence. Pardon me, it was the destruction of evidence hearing that I believe was on May 12th.
Okay, so it's a hearing in this case.
In this case.
Here's what I would say, because it sounds to me like what defense is trying to do is impeach the witness with a prior inconsistent statement, potentially. It's a little hard. But I would say if that's what you're doing,
Here, I don't think I am trying to impeach him. I'm trying to clarify what he was talking about in terms of the class of weapons that could have done this. And if I'm using his words, and I was just going to ask for some clarification about what falls within this category. I had assumed that Luger semi-automatic pistol included Glocks and maybe some other types of firearms.
okay. Can I just have you, I realize they likely have it, but can I have you show Mr. Overstreet what it is you're referring to?
it there. Cartridge cases, yeah. So the cartridge cases were fired in a 9mm Luger semi-automatic pistol. The Glock that we examined was 9mm.
Where are you getting 22? You said 22 caliber.
I didn't say 22. I read 22 because that's the line number, and for that I apologize.
Well, you did say a 9mm Luger semi-automatic 22 pistol was what I have you as saying. So there's two ways we can deal with this. I can either sustain the objection and ask that they not consider that particular portion of the answer, but that's going to draw their attention to it, or I can have the witness can explain the answer more fully. I'm willing to do either one. What would you like?
Would it be helpful for the witness to have the transcript?
Yeah, it might indeed, but Mr. Overstreet, given your concern, what's your preference?
My preference would be that the question was re-asked and allow the.
All right, we'll do that.
Answer.
And do you have any issue with Mr. Samuelson reviewing the transcript?
Not at all.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
All right, let's bring the jury back in.
I'll go ahead and get the jury. And do you want me to read the record room?
That's fine.
All right, the jury.
All right, everyone can have a seat. For the jury, I sustained the objection to the last question and the answer that was given in response to it, so you should disregard that. Ms. Maxfield, if you'd like to rephrase the question.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Samuelson, do you recall testifying on May 12th of 2021 in an earlier hearing in this case?
Yes, I do.
And on that day, do you recall being asked this question regarding the casings? You determined they weren't fired through the same gun, but in theory, that size of bullet that was collected from the scene would fit that gun? Answer, the bullets or the cartridge cases? Question, I'm sorry, the cartridge cases. And your answer, the cartridge cases, yeah. So the cartridge cases were fired in a 9mm Luger semi-automatic pistol. The Glock that we examined was 9mm. Do you recall getting that answer?
I think that there might be some context missing prior to that paragraph you just read me. But what I do recall was saying that the cartridge cases, I think we discussed that the two of them were fired in the same gun. They were fired in a 9mm Luger caliber pistol.
Okay, so my question is Luger kind of the bigger classification and the Glock's a Luger?
9mm Luger is a particular specific brand of ammunition that ammunition manufacturers produce ammunition for, and fire manufacturers will produce firearms to fire the 9mm Luger caliber cartridge.
But the phrase that you use, and again, I don't want to quibble, I just want to understand. The phrase that you use is they were fired in a 9mm Luger semi-automatic pistol. So the Luger was describing the pistol?
No, I was describing that they were fired in a 9mm Luger caliber pistol.
So we just left out a word.
Possibly, or it might not have made it in the transcript. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to go back and read the context of what we were discussing.
That's fair enough. Let me ask you this. You said that a Glock wouldn't be the only type of weapon that could create the tool marks that you saw in these casings. What other kinds of weapons could have created that tool mark?
Well, I think what we discussed about was in my report, I talked about the fired bullets and the cartridge case together. When we look at both of those together, I don't know of any other firearms that would have produced those markings other than a Glock. The cartridge cases by themselves, Smith & Wesson made a firearm that made that shape of a firing pin, but the bullets had completely different rifling characteristics. There's the polymer 80 slides that they make slides as well too that they sell in their kits that are not Glock slides. They're marketed by the polymer 80 company. Those have similar markings, but typically they're sold with a polymer 80 barrel, which would produce different markings as well. So when we look at the bullets and the cartridge cases together, so the bullets from the body as well as the cartridge cases of the scene, when we put those together, I feel very strongly they were fired. It was a Glock pistol that fired them.
You would agree that Glock is one of the most popular handguns in the United States?
It is a very popular firearm.
In fact, Glock has about 65% of the market share for handguns in this country. Isn't that true?
I do not know that.
Do you know whether Glock sold $750 million worth of Glocks in 2016?
No, I'm not aware of that.
You would agree, though, that there are millions and millions of Glock owners in this country?
I do not know how many their owners there are.
You have no scientific or forensic evidence from which to conclude that the lower frame of the Glock 17 was ever fired after it left the Glock factory?
So the Glock frame that I received of the Model 17, the frame, the barrel, and the slide all have the same serial number, so that means they were assembled together. They're not a mismatch of parts.
That's not my question, though, Mr. Samuelson. My question is, you have no scientific evidence from which to conclude that the lower frame of the Glock 17 was ever fired after it left the Glock factory.
I don't think
that
it's a
slide or any slide. You have no scientific evidence to support that.
I'm not aware of any scientific testing that could establish that fact.
And you have no scientific evidence from which to conclude that the lower frame of the Glock 17 was actually used in this murder.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Nothing further. Thank you.
All right, redirect.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Samuelson, I just want on that last point about determining whether a frame was used previously, besides the test firing at the manufacturer, were you stating that there actually isn't a scientific method for determining whether the lower frame was ever fired?
That's correct.
I suppose other than possibly checking to see if there's gunshot residue or something on it?
That's possible. I guess what I was saying is that we know that when they're all assembled together, the serial number, barrel, slide, and frame, that those are fired by the manufacturer during their testing. Whether it's been comes to an own, there's no way I can establish that that frame has then been fired other additional times as well after that.
Sure. So it's not the same for the slide and barrel?
That's correct.
Just want to cover a couple of topics that Ms. Maxfield covered. That is, you talked about by the time the gun comes to you, and Ms. Maxfield talked about this too, that you're expecting the forensics to be done, but she only focused on DNA. Is that also true for fingerprinting? You'd expect if that's going to be attempted, that that's going to be done before it comes to you?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And I think there was a little bit of confusion about whether DNA was actually collected. And I want to make sure I understand what you're saying about that. Were you saying that if it was to be done, that would have been done prior, not that it had been done?
Yeah, if it was been done, it would have been had to been done prior to our handling of the evidence.
Okay, but you weren't necessarily saying that it had been done.
That's correct.
Okay, so were you aware that fingerprint analysis was actually conducted on those two shell cases?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
So.
And is that something that you would need to know to do your portion of your job?
No, we would not.
Is it also possible that, or is it routine, I guess, if there is debris or matter on shell casings, that you would actually, or somebody in the lab would actually clean them off in order to do your microscopic comparison?
If it's if it's related to DNA analysis or fingerprint, typically that would be done by one of those two sections of the laboratory. Other debris that happens to be on there, such as dirt or debris or maybe just blood because of from the scene, we will note that or observe that in our notes, and then we will actually collect or clean as appropriately during our analysis.
Okay. But do you need a cleaned or debris-free, I guess, shell casing in order to do that comparison?
Oftentimes we don't. The markings are microscopic in nature, and only certain parts of that. So we will clean the parts that we need to, but we don't necessarily need to have it completely clean and all foreign material removed from it, though. So.
Okay. And I'm going to make sure that this gets clarified. I think Ms. Maxfield did a pretty good job actually of trying to clarify. But when you're talking about your belief that these shell casings that were found at the crime scene were in fact shot or fired from a Glock, you're saying that in conjunction with the shell casing, you're also looking at the bullets that were recovered and saying between the two of those, you're confident that these were fired from a Glock.
Yes, you have to look at the key components together, and we're making the assumption that this was all from the same event. If this bullets and cartridge cases were could be tied to any particular gun, it's my belief that it would have to be a Glock that would have fired that evidence.
Okay, and then considering, or I want to make this absolutely clear. You say Luger, you're not talking about a brand of firearm.
No, the 9mm Luger, that is the complete title of that caliber of ammunition and the Glock pistol.
Okay. And then just finally here, when you're talking about looking at this wear and tear on guns, and I know you said you didn't really see any on the full, complete Glock 17. You kind of touched on this, and Ms. Maxfield did a little bit too, but is really the wear and tear, is it coming from the actual firing of the gun, or is wear and tear more or less like some of the things that you talked about, like being holstered over and over, possibly being dropped, things like that? Are you seeing more wear and tear from those things, or is it from the actual firing of the gun?
It's more of the signs of use and abuses, I guess is what I would call it, versus wear and tear. But it's just when a firearm is holstered and unholstered or been carried, that tends to rub some of the finish off of the firearm. If they've been dropped during their use of handling, or if they've been cleaned improperly, where you might be scrubbing away some of the interior of the barrel surfaces, or if it has, or if it's been fired a lot. It actually, those gunpowder residues and bullet, copper and lead residues will build up in the barrel. So if I don't see any of that, it appears to be of I guess as new type of condition, or have had minimal use.
And on that same topic, we covered this a little bit, and I threw out the number 10 rounds or less. Miss Maxfield talked to you about different terminology and whether it was scientifically valid or not. But I want to, ask you kind of the bottom line is, if this gun has only been, specifically the frame, if the frame has only been used to fire a few rounds, and that slide and barrel wasn't used at all, would you expect to see any wear and tear really at all on that gun?
I would not, no.
I don't have any further questions.
Your Honor, I have one question that I would ask the court's indulgence, so I don't have to bring Mr. Samuelson. It's not anything we've covered. It's like a whole brand new area that I forgot to ask.
But why don't we have the jury step out for just 1 minute so I can.
All right, to the jury.
What's that? All right, just so I understand, are you asking to reopen cross-examination?
No, I just want to ask him one question, and I can bring him back another day to do it, but it's only about, he found 2 short black hairs on the gun kit and noted them in his report, and that's what I wanted to ask.
Do you have any objection to it? As long as you're given the chance to follow up, or?
My objection would just be relevance. So what if they found 2 black hairs on a gun kit that was handed through numerous people?
What is the relevance?
The fact that they're not her hairs is the relevance.
Okay, so this is relevance is a pretty low standard, so if the objection is relevance, I would allow it. But with you given the chance to also ask questions if you want.
Sure. I do think that they would have to establish individuals who handled that case in between, though, because they're asking the jury to speculate. That's all this is.
I'm asking for his observations of this gun kit during his analysis, and
So
the
that
fact
the
that there
jury
were
can
2 hairs is relevant.
When you say they're not your client's hair, were these hairs tested at some point?
Well, they could have been. They could have been tested against Dan Brophy's hairs because they collected those during the autopsy. But what I understand is they're short hairs, not long gray hairs, short dark hairs that would be inconsistent with Ms. Brophy's hair.
All right, I'll allow the question. I'll allow you to follow up, unless, if your objection is based on relevance, I'm going to allow the question, and I'm going to allow you to follow up with it.
My secondary objection, Your Honor, is speculation. I mean, that's all this is asking for. You're asking to speculate where those hairs came from.
I'm not.
We don't even know that they're human hair. So
I'm asking him simply to identify them.
I think you can address that with cross-examination. I don't think it's necessarily calling for speculation. I think it's pointing out evidence which is arguably inconsistent with Ms. Brophy being the person who had the gun kit. Arguably not. I'll allow you to follow up on that.
And I guess to that point, are you saying that these were in the ghost gun kit or the Glock 17 kit?
He took pictures of them, and I think it's on the ghost gun. It's on the.
It's in the report.
It's in his report. In fact, he's looking at the pictures right now, aren't you?
Yeah, I actually have a picture of a hair.
I mean, let me put it another way, Mr. Overstreet. If she were to call him as a witness in the defense case, I'd allow her to ask the question, and I'd allow you to cross-examine. So really, my question is whether or not you have an objection to us proceeding sort of procedurally in the manner that she wishes to.
I don't. I just maintain
Okay.
speculation.
All right. Okay, and why don't we bring the jury back in then. And you can go off the record, it's fine.
Right, we'll go off the record.
Sorry, Your Honor, maybe just to
Wait, leave it on, let's just leave it on.
Yep,
there.
we're on.
Go ahead.
since this is probably only gonna take a minute,
Mhm.
and then we're probably gonna be sending the jury back out for a break, should we just maybe take our break now since we're already at?
We could do that. Why don't we do that? Tell them we're here for our, we'll take our 15-minute break and be back at 10:30.
Okay,
That makes sense.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right, let's do that.
Okay, we'll go off the record and we'll maintain in recess for a break, and I'll mute WebEx. All rise.
be seated. And Ms. Maxfield, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Mr. Samuelson, I had one question I forgot to ask you. When you were examining the gun kit, you took 2 hairs off of the plastic. What do you call that? Was it jig? What did you call the red thing?
The plastic jig.
Okay. So you took 2 short black hairs off the plastic jig?
Yes, they were. They appear to be hairs. I'm not certain I did.
But you preserved them?
Yes, I did.
You put them in a manila envelope so they could be analyzed later?
Potentially be analyzed later.
Okay. And how long were they?
I'd have to look at my notes.
Your picture maybe will help.
I don't have an actual measurement in my notes, but they appear to be short.
Less than an inch?
I'm not exactly certain about that, but
Not more than 2 inches?
probably not.
Almost certainly not.
It doesn't look like it. No,
Okay.
they are curved, so you'd have to lay them out straight to measure that. But.
All right. No further questions. Thank you.
All right, and Mr. Overstreet?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Samuelson, did you, how many people handled that gun kit before it got to you?
I don't know, but it appears to have been handled before me.
So you don't know if anybody who handled that gun case these hairs could have come from?
That's true.
I mean, it could be from the person who put together that gun kit.
Yes.
Could be anybody in between that by the time it made it to you.
Yes.
And your testimony today is that you can't even tell whether those are hairs at all, actually.
That's true.
So even if it was a hair that was associated with a named person, did you not already determine that that gun kit was not used in the murder?
Yes, I did.
So what significance would these hairs have to you when analyzing this gun?
They would be of no significance.
No further questions.
All right. May Mr. Samuelson be excused?
For the state, yes.
For defense?
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you. You can step down, Mr. Samuelson.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will recall Officer Aaron Sparling.
Okay. All right, Officer Sparling, we will swear you in again, even though I know you just had it done yesterday, but since we're on a new day.
Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and but the truth?
I do.
Then you may be seated and may remove your mask. And then please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
My first name is Aaron. It's spelled Aaron, and my last name is Sparling. Sparling.
All right, when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Sparling, we left off yesterday talking about some computer artifacts that you had located on this computer that was found in the closet of the Brophy's home. And I had taken us up to February 23rd, where it appears that Miss Brophy was potentially visiting eBay. And so we're going to pull up State's Exhibit 82 here in a minute and move forward with that same line of questioning on some other artifacts that you may have found on that computer. But before we do that, I want to ask you a follow-up to yesterday. Did you visit we talked about some of these links.
Correct.
Some of these URLs that some of them are fairly lengthy, some of them a lot shorter. And maybe by way as just an example, that YouTube search right there. Did you go back and did you kind of, at some point in this investigation or recently, did you go back and actually attempt to visit those URLs to see if they're still active, to see kind of what it was that Ms. Brophy would have been viewing?
I did.
And did you do that for several of these?
I did.
And did it actually return results, or were you getting results for pages that maybe no longer exist?
Both. Well, I mean, I never got pages that no longer exist. I got some that would just redirect back to the home page, and some that would redirect back as though exactly how it was rendered here.
Okay, understood. So on some of these that you visited, did it appear it was taking you to specifically pages that the user was actually viewing and visiting?
That's my understanding, yes.
And specifically, I don't want to touch on all of them that you maybe went and checked out, but specifically on the Ghost Guns website, were you able to follow any of those links to any of the active pages?
I was. One specifically took me to look like a splash screen for a user login that would ask for the username and password.
And that was one of the search or web visits that you had documented or talked about yesterday?
That is correct.
So we left off on February 23rd, 2018, as I said, around the apparent time that Ms. Brophy was purchasing this slide barrel on eBay. I want to then go to March 11th, and let's see if we can, oh, it's already up there, great. Could you tell us what you were looking at on March 11th at around 3:25 p.m. for the user of this computer?
Okay, here again we're dealing with the Chrome web browser, and we're looking at Chrome web browser artifacts, specifically web history, web visits, and a link to YouTube with a reference to cleaning a Glock 17.
And I'm not necessarily asking if you followed or visited this particular link, but just in your own experience, is there quite a few reference videos available on YouTube regarding these types of things?
It's my understanding that there is, yes.
So on the same day, this actually looks very shortly thereafter, maybe in a matter of 7 seconds or so. Do we see another YouTube visit and of a different type of search?
We do. Again, it's coming from the same Chrome web browser artifacts, and this time it has to do with a Glock 17 model Gen 4 or Gen 4 detail strip. And then it's talking about disassembly, clean, lube, and assembly, referencing YouTube.
Okay. And then the next day, and actually I guess sort of later that evening, actually at 12:01 a.m., so a little shortly after midnight on the 12th, what does it appear the user is doing there?
Again, this comes from the Chrome web browser. We're looking at the web history artifact and the web visit artifact. It looks though someone is looking or checking on UPS tracking information, and there appears to be a UPS tracking number in the output of this string.
Okay. And it looks like almost at the exact same time, if we go down to the next artifact, it appears to be more tracking information. Is that correct?
That's how I interpret it, yes.
And then later that day, about 6:43 p.m. on March 12, 2018, what's being done from the user standpoint there?
Well, here, again, we're dealing with the Chrome web browser. The fave icon, or favicon, however you wish to pronounce it, is instantiated at this date and time, and that, again, is the little icon that you will sometimes see associated with the website that will be up in the address bar. And it's linked to this eBay Glock Gen 17 or Glock Gen 4, Glock 17 Gen 4 slide and barrel.
Okay, and is that, I mean, similar to the stuff you were talking about yesterday that we saw in late February?
Correct.
Those types of searches, okay. And then I want to take you, well, did you yourself verify when the Glock 17 slide and barrel was actually delivered to Ms. Brophy?
Did I actually verify that?
Right.
No.
Okay. we'll talk to Detective Merrill about that. So from the 12th to the 26th, so it looks like a couple week gap there. But nonetheless, on March 26, 2018, what kind of searches or web visits are you seeing there?
We're still inside dealing with Chrome web browser artifacts here. This is the Chrome web history artifact. We're seeing a link to, which looks to be YouTube for loading a 9mm Glock.
That's about 10:13 a.m. on March 26th.
Correct.
Okay, and then shortly after that, is there another website visited?
Well, it's just the favicon is more than likely yes. So this artifact shows that a user would have potentially gone to that website because a favicon is associated to that website has been created at that date and time.
Okay, and that's on March 26th. Again, it looks essentially at the same time, a second apart. So does that appear to be sort of related activities?
It is, yes. Okay. That's my interpretation of it.
And that specific search or website visit was about loading a 9mm Glock.
The Chrome web history was the one below it with the favicon is associated to a search query for cleaning a Glock 17.
Okay, so two different searches regarding one loading a 9mm Glock and the other one cleaning a Glock 17.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, Officer Sprung, I think that's the remainder of the questions I have. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Before I hand it off. You've taken a look at State's Exhibit 82. That's what we've been looking up at the screen. And that was a document that you've looked over and verified that it's accurate to the things that you've been testifying to?
Yes.
Did you also provide a guide, a PDF guide, that helps explain some of these terms that are used in here?
It's not in PDF form, but I have a part of the PDF guide that will explain some of those terms. Yes.
Okay, and did you provide that?
I have it with me.
Did you provide that to us previously?
I believe so. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Do you have it? I don't know if you do or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll double check to make
Okay.
sure before we introduce this as an exhibit. But thank you. I think that's all the questions.
Okay.
All right. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Sparta.
Good morning.
So let's start with what you were talking about last. Those links that you followed, do you have a list or a record, or did you preserve, I think is really what I'm wondering, on any of those YouTube links that you tried to connect to?
What do you mean?
Well, Mr. Overstreet was just asking you about whether you followed those links.
Okay.
And whether they were all still live good links. I
So-
think that was the gist of his question.
So if there's some sort of preservation record of that, the answer is no. Well, I mean, I guess technically there would be because I did it inside of a Chrome browser, so we'd have to do forensics on the computer I did it on to pull that out. But so I just basically took the same string that's in there, cut and pasted into a Chrome browser, and it populated the output.
Okay, so you went through that and looked for your own purposes, but you didn't create a report or a record to actually keep those YouTube videos. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand. Like when you mean keep the YouTube videos.
To preserve
I just
them,
went to, I didn't go to
download them and preserve them. That's
I
what I'm
didn't. I
asking
didn't
about.
go to the YouTube videos themselves. I just went to the site that it renders.
Okay, all right. So did you actually observe yourself? Did you look at any of those YouTube videos?
I did not.
Okay, you just figured out that some were active and some weren't. Some were still accessible and some weren't.
The web page. I never actually accessed the videos.
Okay, I heard that.
It's the just so that we can be clear. All I was checking was that the URL that's in the output of the tool was still active,
Okay,
or that it was rendering what the tool was showing.
okay. So if you did not actually download the videos or preserve them, did you keep a record? Do you have a record, and can you tell us now which of those links were still active when you checked?
No, I can't.
So yesterday when you were testifying, you were describing, I think, what amounted to two different ways of processing or working with hard drives that have been seized. And there were two hard drives in particular that we were talking about. There are two HP laptops that were seized on September 5th. And then there was a September 7th warrant that you described to go through those. Was it your information that both of the, well, first of all, were you present on September 5th when they were actually seized?
I was not.
Were you given information that they were both seized from the same room, and specifically a bedroom in the upstairs of the Brophy home?
Yes, well, I didn't know it was the upstairs, I just knew it was a bedroom.
And I think the description yesterday was that one of them came from a closet in the bedroom, another one near the bed.
Correct.
And you described, I think, having more success or finding more information of interest to you in the one that was in the closet. Was that correct?
It was interest to the detectives,
Okay.
but yes.
Okay. All right. Were you able to tell from examining those two laptops whether the person who had set up the more recent one had had assistance from some sort of IT technician in migrating the data?
I didn't make any note of that.
Did it appear to you when you examined them that the older of the two, the data from it had not been fully migrated onto the newer of the two?
What do you mean?
The data from the older laptop had not been fully migrated onto and incorporated into the new laptop?
It didn't appear so, but I didn't make note of it either.
Okay. All right. So I think you're getting at what you were talking about yesterday, these two ways of going about preparing hard drives for some sort of additional analysis. One of them you described as imaging the computer's hard drive, and when that's done, apparently you can look through the file structure,
Correct.
right? And then you were going on to, and I think didn't completely describe the other method of doing it, but you were talking about essentially an indexing process, and I think you actually used the term processing.
Sure.
Could you just describe that in a little bit more detail to make sure that we're all following what the difference between those two processes or approaches would be?
Absolutely. So would you like me to describe them both independently?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah. And you did describe the first one yesterday fairly well, but the second one I think is what I
Is
particularly
what you're
like.
asking? Okay.
Yeah,
Sure. No
but
problem.
both would be
Oh,
helpful.
okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll just start with the first one. So the first one, you can take the software. You can take. There's certain forensic software out there that will allow you to take the forensic image. Well, there's a couple things that you could do actually, but you can take the forensic image, import it into the software without having processed the drive. It will read the structure of the drive, of the file system, which will allow the analyst or the examiner or the investigator to traverse through the file system, through the structure of the file system. So you could, for example, just for clarification, you could go to the root of the operating system, so in this case like C drive. You could go to the specific user, we'll say Bob. We could go to Bob's desktop and we could potentially look at items that were on Bob's desktop. We could also go to Bob's downloads folder, look at stuff inside the downloads folder. You can also query stuff that are, we can't really query, but you could search by manually traversing through the structure and then export items out for further analysis. Does that help?
It does, and so that's the first approach, right?
That's one approach.
Okay.
Yep.
So the second approach with the processing and the indexing, can you describe that too?
Sure. So, which is probably more common. You take the actual evidence file or the EO1, in this case the image of the hard drive. The software knows how to interpret that. It ingests it into the software, and then it essentially goes through the drive and it processes the drive from the beginning to the end, looking for known files or file structures. Essentially everything that's stored on the computer is a file. It has some sort of file format to it, and there's in most cases a header or a footer that describes what that file is. It knows how to then index those files and then puts them into categories for you, or as well as indexes the entire drive to make it searchable.
Okay. So, and that's when you use the term processing, does that normally apply to or describe that second, or does the term processing, can that be applied to either of those approaches?
I would apply it probably to the second approach. The first approach is more manual. It's all manual. So the software's not doing anything for you. Where the second one is you basically click, if you will, like different menu buttons to tell the software what you want it to do, and then it goes and does that.
Okay. So in your line of work, when you do digital forensic analysis, which of those two approaches do you use for you?
It depends on the case.
Okay. If you yourself are going to do the analysis, you're not going to hand it off to anybody else, which would you use?
It depends again on the case.
It would,
Yeah,
okay.
it really does.
Okay, so in this instance, well, is it,
And in some cases, to be fair, both.
as I understand your description of going through the file structure, that would be much more similar to just looking at a computer. It's not the same thing, but you could sort of envision as you're looking at it where those things would be.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, yes, if you understood it would be, the answer is yes. It's easier to interpret that output if you understand the file structure a little more in depth than, say, the common user. It wouldn't be, the common everyday user probably would maybe struggle a little bit initially, but I think they could get there, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, so in this particular instance, in this investigation, the request was brought to you by whom? After the September 7th warrant was obtained and you had the 2 laptops, who asked you to take some steps to assist with the investigation?
That would have been, I believe it was Detective Posey.
And what did he request of you?
Just requested that the computers were processed.
And how did he ask you to do that? What was it that he wanted you to accomplish in those first steps?
I don't recall the exact conversation.
Which of the 2 processes or the 2 approaches that you've just described, which did you use at that time?
I used the second one where I processed it with the software suite.
And did you then give it back to Detective Posey to review?
So I set it up on a I set up a forensic viewing station for them to view. So yes, they could view the case files that was created, yes.
All right. And did they at that point ask you for assistance in reviewing that, or was that initial investigative review, the part where they were actually trying to absorb the content of what was on the computer? Were you involved in that, or did you just set it up so that they could do that?
Well, I initially set it up so they could do it. I do this for every detective or investigator that asks, and then give them a small tutorial on how to navigate through the software. It's designed to be user-friendly, and it's designed for investigators in mind. And then they work through it.
Okay. And are there times that you actually are doing some of that analysis, or is it typical for you just to set that up and have the detectives go through and review the content?
It's more often than not, the investigator or detective will review the content.
Right. So was there a later point in time that you were asked then to find specific items of evidence?
What do you mean?
Did the detectives come back to you and say, here are some things we found that are of interest to us. Would you please forensically identify these and pull these out?
Yeah, so if I think what you're asking is they went through and bookmarked a bunch of items that were of interest. And then I worked on the analysis of those bookmarked items.
Okay. And the analysis that you performed, could you describe what that was?
It's just basically looking at what artifacts they find and associating what that artifact, just interpreting what that artifact means and putting it into basically a usable way to explain it.
Okay. And is that essentially this report Exhibit 82 that we were just looking at?
I'm sorry?
Exhibit 82 that we were just looking at, the one that you went through with Mr. Overstreet, was that essentially what you produced as a result of that request?
That is.
So you spent some time yesterday with Mr. Overstreet talking about the user accounts that were on those 2 HP laptops, and it sounds like most of the activity on both of them was under the Nancy user account. One was lowercase Nancy and one was uppercase Nancy, but that was essentially where most of the activity was. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is there anything, are you able to ascertain as you go through using the most sophisticated of the software suites available to you, are you able to ascertain who, beyond looking at the user account, who actually engaged in activity on a computer?
I am not. If the question you're asking is like who's physically at the keyboard or physically at the device, right. I'm not able to do that, no.
Okay. And is there anything that would allow you to ascertain whether more than one person was present when a video is being watched?
No.
Thank you, that was helpful.
Thank you.
I think that's it.
All right, redirect.
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, you can step in. The state's next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the state will recall Kelsey Guay.
Okay. All right, Ms. Guay, we're going to do this just like we did the other day. We'll have you sworn in when you first get into the box.
I'll have you raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then, because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to state and spell your first and last name.
Kelsey Guay, KelseyGuay.
All right, when you're ready, Mr. Overstreet.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Guay, we talked before about determining cell site locations as they pertain to particular phones. So I want to continue that conversation this morning. And specifically, we're discussing phone numbers associated with Nancy Brophy and Dan Brophy. We're not going to talk about anybody else's phones. And so I want to talk about some specific dates and times that you have provided analysis for. And here in a moment, we're going to put up what's marked as States Exhibit 100. And to orient you as well, we're talking about the date of 12/24. Did you create this document that we're looking at?
I did.
Okay. And when you say you created the map and the things that are seen within the map, and then you also provided the text.
Yeah, this is a screenshot of the GeoTime program that's used for the visualizing the call detail records.
Okay. And that's the same program that you were using throughout this case that you talked about last time?
Yes.
And so specifically on December 24th of 2017, I want to direct us to a specific time, near 8 p.m. is really what I'm focusing on. Can you tell where Nancy Brophy's phone is for the majority of the day?
On that day, her phone had the recorded cell site location details at that tower, which is located near their home location and would most likely provide coverage to their home location.
Okay. And that would be true for around 8 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay. And then what about Dan Brophy's phone? Where did you record his phone at certain times during that day?
Yeah, so for Dan Brophy's phone, there are multiple towers in the Beaverton area, and his phone had activity located or recorded at two cell site locations. There's a red X on the map, which indicates the Avamere Beaverton location, which was conveyed to me by, I believe, Detective Merrill as a place of employment during that time for him. And so there was activity in towers near that location from approximately 2:30 to 8 p.m.
Okay. And then after 8 p.m., did it appear Dan Brophy's phone was on the move, or did you record any data?
After 8 p.m., I believe there were some cell site detail records indicating that there was activity kind of in the direction of his house, ultimately leading at that cell site that covers their home location.
Okay, and so would that be consistent then with Dan Brophy being at the Avamere place of employment between the hours of 2:30 and 8 p.m. and then heading home?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you exactly what time he clocked in and out, because again, it's not going to give you precise GPS location, but it is consistent with him being in that area.
Okay. And that's when I say stuff like that, that's why I'm going to ask you if it's consistent. I'm not asking you to give us an exact location or anything like that, but just consistent with somebody who is at, or Dan Brophy being at his place of employment, Avamere, sometime in that range.
Yes.
Okay. And Your Honor, the state will move to admit State's Exhibit 100.
Any objection to 100?
I'm sorry. No.
All right, Exhibit 100 will be admitted.
The next date I want to talk about is February 17th of 2018, and so we'll show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 101. And again, is this a document that you created?
Yes.
Could you talk to us about the day of the 17th? There's a lot more happening here with maybe some more movement. Can you kind of walk us through the morning with each of their phones?
Yeah, so again, this is just a still screenshot that's kind of covering actually quite a bit of time. And it can, be hard to show movement in a static image. So this graphic covers a little before 7 through a little bit after noon, probably close to 11:30 a.m. on the 17th. And on that date, there were recorded call detail records for Dan Brophy's phone at the Goose Hollow cell site, which we've established as most likely providing coverage to the OCI. So his phone had recorded call detail records from 6:53 through 11:07 a.m., whereas the phone number associated with Nancy had primarily data transmissions, but also voice calls recorded kind of along cell sites along Highway 26, as well as kind of leading north on I-5, ultimately having a few data usage records near the Portland Expo Center at 10:30 and 10:50 a.m. And then ultimately, her phone had recorded call detail areas or records in the area of, I guess, Raleigh Hills, kind of leading back to the Beaverton area, leading up to 11:30.
Okay. And so the time that Nancy Brophy's phone is in the area of the Expo Center, for the entirety of the time that it's at the Expo Center, is Dan Brophy's phone in the area of the Culinary Institute?
Yeah, the records are all at the cell site providing coverage to the OCI.
Sure. And do you know what time that Dan Brophy's phone is not hitting that tower anymore and going to another tower?
I don't have it on this screenshot because again, this ends at 11:30 a.m.
Sure.
So if we were to pull up the records, we could look at that precisely. But this image only goes through 11:30.
So this is really focusing on the time that Nancy Brophy's phone is at the Expo Center, and then focusing on where Dan Brophy's phone was during that time.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And at this point, Your Honor, we move to admit State's Exhibit 101.
No objection.
All right, 101 will be admitted.
Now, I want to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 102. It's already been admitted. Do you recognize this image as well?
Yes.
Okay, and did you also create this?
Yes.
And could you describe what it is that we're looking at in this image?
Yes. So, one of the resources that you have available to you when working with call detail records is NDCAC, which is the National Domestic Communication Assistance Center. That has a database essentially of all of the different cell sites throughout the entire US. So one of the features they provide is a searchable option. So you could put in a landmark, you could put in an address, you could put in a point of interest, and then filter on the different types of carriers. They have all of the ones that are in the US. So I was able to create this graphic by searching the North Folk, I always get this wrong, North Fork Wolf Creek Public Range, and filtering purely to AT&T towers. And because I did this in 2020, I wanted to only look at the AT&T towers at the time of when these records were created. So this would have been 2018, because I focused on 2018 since most of the year was in 2018 that we had the cell site records. And then I put a filter of, I believe the first filter I did was 5 miles to see if there were any AT&T towers located within 5 miles of this interest. There were not. So then the next option was to do 10 miles. So this is showing all of the AT&T cell site locations within 10 miles of this location.
Okay. And were you provided information about that location as an area that Nancy may or may not have visited at some point?
Yes.
Okay. And that's where that red, I don't know what you would call that, marker is, and that it says North Fork Wolf Creek Public Range. That's the area that you were focusing on?
That is the point that I was using to search the radius of 10 miles.
Okay. And with that search, how many towers did you find within 10 miles?
So on this, the blue little circles, I believe there are 4 of them on this map, indicate AT&T cell site locations within 10 miles of that placeholder.
And I'm going to have you use the pointer there in front of you on the larger screen behind you. Could you just briefly point at each of what you're identifying as towers within 10 miles?
Yes. One here, one here.
Okay, thank you. And so you identify these 4 towers that possibly would provide coverage of that particular area of interest.
I was just looking to see what cell sites were even in the area.
Okay, so not even necessarily looking for coverage, you're just saying, I just want to know if there's any towers that are even anywhere near this place.
Correct.
Now, are you familiar with this area at all out on Highway 26?
I am familiar with the Stubbs Stewart State Park.
Okay. And is that also marked on this map? I can't see.
It is. It's right by the thing where it says CSV right above States Exhibit 102. It's
okay. So is this, in your experience in heading out that direction, is this kind of halfway to the beach or a little less than halfway to the beach maybe?
Yeah, a little less than halfway.
Okay. Is it very rural in that area?
Yes.
Okay. Definitely getting outside the city at that point?
Yes.
So is that something you would expect then, given the cell tower coverage, being a lot less than what you might expect in the city?
Yes.
Now, is there another tool that you used or can you use to then further try to narrow what is the likely tower that would serve a particular area of interest?
Yeah, you can use Google Earth.
Okay. And how does that assist you?
Google Earth will provide you with a topographic elevation profile, essentially. You can have a point and then draw a line to another point and ask it to draw like an image or a graph of what the elevation profile looks like between those 2 points.
Okay. And why is that important when you're trying to determine cell coverage?
It can be important when trying to determine cell coverage because if there is, for example, a mountain range in the way, signal is less likely to permeate that mountain range. It would have to bounce off, bounce up, and get to the other side. So it probably would get crappy, if any, service.
Okay. And so when you're looking, especially in a rural area like this, does that become more important as the towers get farther and farther away from each other?
Yes.
Okay. And so you know, I guess one way of looking at it is we can look at just the distance from a point of interest to the tower. Are you saying that that's not necessarily indicative of the coverage?
Distance is important, but not the only factor.
Okay. And so in this case, that, I guess we'll just deal with this first. That sort of one that's farther away up, it looks like maybe near Vernonia. Did you even really do much further analysis on that, or was that just an unlikely to cover that area tower?
Based on the distance, I did not focus on that one specifically because there were three others that were kind of closer in as the crow flies, kind of like a linear distance. So I didn't focus on the one near Vernonia.
Okay. But did you focus on the other three?
I did.
Okay. And so I'm going to show you what's marked as States Exhibit 106 first. Did you also create this image?
I did.
Okay. And if you put, yeah, you put a date on there, 3/26 of 18. Is that the date of the where you're looking to see where cell phones were?
Yes.
Okay. Not the date that you did the analysis.
Correct.
Okay.
This is the date of the records.
Okay. And so on that date, did you analyze where Daniel Brophy's phone was and Nancy Brophy's phones were?
Yes.
Okay. And could you tell us on this particular date, March 26, 2018, where and what times where Dan's phone was?
I don't have the little call out flag, so I can't specifically go into say exactly when it started and stopped. But between these hours, you can see on, I guess that would be the left-hand side of the screen, there's essentially what looks to be like a timeline or a time bar with the records being shown on the screen starting or being recorded between 10:17 a.m. and 12:01 a.m. It does say GMT because this program has been updated, so it's actually in PST. The records that are shown are actually in PST, so that's not an accurate representation. So this is between 10:17 and 12:01 PST on March 26, 2018. And so this just shows all of the records that would be on those, call detail record lists, just visualized on the map. So between that time, there were records showing that Dan's phone had usage at that cell site near OCI, whereas Nancy's had records kind of along 26 during that time period, Highway 26, and then ultimately ending up in Portland off I-84.
Okay. So we'll break this down a little bit. I'll probably have you point to a few things, but I want to speak more generally. You've analyzed months and months of records in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Specifically, probably around 7 or 8 months worth of records?
Yes.
And in some of that, were you sort of trying to determine people's patterns, meaning where Dan would most likely be at certain dates and times, and where Nancy was at certain dates and times? Were you sort of developing patterns as you went through this?
I would say you could see like a general pattern that Dan's phone was pretty consistent, bouncing between work and home with occasional trips outside the metro area. And then generally speaking, Nancy Brophy's phone had lots of activity kind of over the metro area. So her phone was far more active in different areas than Dan's was.
Okay. And when looking specifically at Nancy's phone, especially over the months that you had records for, did you notice whether or not she took several trips out to the coast?
Yes.
And was that consistent that when you would see these trips out to the coast, you could actually track her phone sometimes around her house all the way out to the coast, whether it was for the day or overnight or whatever, and then see that phone come back?
Yeah, when there were trips kind of out to the Oregon coast, you would see activity along 26 or other highways, ultimately having records at cell sites located in the Oregon coast, whereas Tillamook or other cities.
Okay. And so you saw that trip was taken several times by Nancy Brophy, or at least her phone.
The phone, yes.
Several times out to the coast. Was there any times in your analysis that the phone headed out Highway 26 like it was going to the coast, but it didn't ever quite make it to the coast?
There were times when the phone would kind of go up into the Hillsborough area, that way along 26.
Okay. What about past Hillsborough? When you get out sort of toward that, where you can turn off to go to Steb Stewart or just past that. Was there ever any trips that you were able to analyze that went that far but didn't go all the way to the coast?
So when I looked specifically kind of like the activity, the records that were recorded along that Highway 26, there were 2 times when I noticed kind of out past Hillsborough, but not quite to the coast.
Okay. And what 2 days were those?
March 26th and March 27th.
So I want to talk about March 26th first, and then we talked about this as the map that's up there. On that day, this is one of those days that you said you see Nancy's phone head out towards the coast, past Hillsborough, but not make it to the coast.
Yes.
And then at some point, correct me if I'm wrong, returns to the Portland area.
Yes.
Okay. So on March 26th, did you detect Nancy's phone heading out to a particular area? And specifically what I'm asking about is a particular tower that you have it pinging off of, sort of in that halfway distance to the coast.
There was, I believe, I could double check, but I'm pretty sure there was one record or a couple records at the cell site just off Highway 26. I believe they were data usage records on the 26th, but it was like at least maybe 1, maybe 2, but not a considerable amount of time.
Not a lot of phone usage at that time.
Yes.
And so if you could use the pointer on the big screen behind you, I want to orient us specifically with that last map that we saw that you showed the different towers in that range. Could you use your pointer and could you identify whether those same towers that you were analyzing appear on this map?
Yes. So the 4th tower that you're only focused on would have been north up kind of by Vernonia, but the 3 that I focused on, there 2 are indicated by a little icon, which kind of looks like cell phone tower. So there, and then this green dot is just indicating where that cell site location is.
Okay.
And that there was activity at it.
And that X in the middle, is that same public shooting range?
Yes, that was the one indicated by the red placeholder on the previous.
Okay. And so do you see activity, and I don't know if you know the times, or at least generally what the times were, that you recorded activity off of that tower that is in green closest to the public shooting range?
There would have been at least one transaction sometime between 10:17 and noon. I think probably closer in the 11-ish range because ultimately the phone has activity in Portland off 84 at noon.
At noon. Okay. And so so you're just sort of deducing that for it to be back in Portland around noon, it must not have been that far out on Highway 26 for too long that morning. Okay. So I want to, before we go to the 27th, I want to talk about these towers a little bit more. You said there were 3 towers. I'm going to show you what's marked as States Exhibit 103. And it looks like you've identified where that public shooting range is, and you're determining a distance there, it looks like, to one of those cell towers that you previously identified.
Yes.
Okay. Now, is this a cell tower that you recorded any activity on with Nancy's phone?
No.
Okay. And you determined that one to be about 6.51 miles away from that public shooting range?
In a linear direction.
Linear. Okay. And now I'm going to ask you about that graph on the bottom in a second, but I want to look at the other tower first. Go first to States Exhibit 105. And kind of the same thing here. Are we looking at the one in red for this?
Yes.
And did you identify that as 7.1 miles away from that public shooting range?
Yes.
In a straight line?
Yes.
And did you record any cell site activity with Nancy's phone on either the 26th or 27th on that?
No, there were no records.
Now, just from your experience in looking at cell phone records, if somebody were to continue out Highway 26 towards the coast, is this particular cell tower in relative close relation to Highway 26? Meaning, would you expect to see activity off of that if you were using your phone in that particular area?
Yeah, if you were actively using your phone and you were on Highway 26, kind of driving along past that tower, yes.
Okay. And but you determined no activity from Nancy's phone on either the 26th or the 27th on that tower.
It was not the first data transaction record, no.
Okay. And in fact, out of the 3 towers that we've been discussing, this one was actually the farthest away.
Yes, linearly, yes.
Linearly. Okay. And so I want to look at States Exhibit 104. And is this that third tower that you did record data on from Nancy's phone?
Yes.
And we're talking about just the 26th at this point. Now, between these 3 towers, it looks like we have different shapes on these graphs at the bottom of the screen. Were you able to make a determination on whether or not one of these towers would be most likely to service the area of that public gun range?
Purely looking at topography, it seems that this would be most likely purely based on topography of the elevation profile.
Okay, over the other 2 and specifically third tower up in Vernonia.
Yes.
This would be the most likely based on your analysis.
Purely, based on the topography.
Okay. And so, well, I guess before we move on, I'd move to admit States Exhibits 103, 4, and 5. 103, 104, and 105.
No objection.
All right, 103, 104, and 105 will be admitted.
And then now, Ms. Way, I want to talk about, we've talked about the 26th, we've talked about these cell tower locations. I want to talk about the 27th. And I guess just from your memory, I know I'm not going to ask you exact times, but from your memory on looking at the 26th and Nancy Brophy's phone usage that morning, is it your opinion that she was really in that area for very long?
No, not very long.
She would have been there for a very short amount of time?
Yes.
Okay. But now I want to look at the 27th, the very next day. So this would be States Exhibit 107. Sorry. And so again, another map that you created?
Yes.
Okay. Could you kind of walk us through it again, kind of like you did that 26th map, on where Dan's phone was and where Nancy Brophy's phone was?
Yeah, so again, same thing. This shows all of the call detail records visualized between roughly 10 a.m. through 11:47 a.m. on March 27th, 2018 PST. The records during this time have Dan's phone has recorded cell site activity kind of in that tower that would provide coverage to the OCI, whereas there again, it's kind of hard to visualize maybe movement with a static image, but leading up to 10:30-ish, there were records for Nancy's phone that were hitting off cell sites along Highway 26 in an eastward direction, ultimately having, I believe, if I have the original records, at 10:38, 10:39, there were, and then 11:04, there were records specifically at that tower. I don't know what we're calling it, but the tower right off Highway 26 in that general area.
Yeah, and I don't know that we assigned it a name, but I'll probably refer to it as what you described as the tower that you thought, based on your analysis, would potentially cover cell phone service for that public shooting range.
Yes.
It's a long way of saying a name, I know, but I want to be clear on which ones we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, could you give me those times again where you were detecting cell usage at that tower that potentially covers the public shooting range?
Yeah, there was a record at 10:38 and 10:39. There were two data transactions recorded at that cell site location. And then there was a phone call, an incoming phone call recorded at 11:04, also at that same cell site location.
And then after 11:04, what's the next time that you record any data transmission?
After 11:04, there was a data transaction at 11:08, and then at 11:44 was the subsequent.
And the 11:08, where was that?
I believe that was now going west down 26.
Okay, I want to make sure we got our directions right, because I think you said earlier you saw.
Oh, east. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm backwards. West to the coast, east to Portland.
Okay.
So they were initially leading up to 10:30 west to the coast, and then after the 11:04 phone call, east to Portland.
Okay. And then specifically then the 11:44 time, which tower are we talking about then?
I believe that's one now kind of in the Beaverton area.
Okay. So you have this 10:38, 10:39 data transmissions that are hitting off of that tower that potentially services the public shooting range. And then by 11:08, still the same tower, but it appears the person's moving east.
11:08. I believe the tower that was recorded, or the first cell site location recorded for that one, would have been at 11:08. Would have been this cell site.
Oh, okay. I think I misunderstood.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm west or east back to the Portland now at 11:08.
Gotcha. Okay. Now before 10:38, did you have any data transmissions? Was that what you were talking about? Is kind of moving along 26, Highway 26?
Yes, leading up to the 10:38, which was that one that were the very long name, potentially servicing the area.
And then what was the last data transmission before 10:38?
There were multiple data transmissions leading up to the 10:38. I mean, we have 10:26, 27, 28, 29, 33.
Let's not go over all those, but is that what's kind of leading you to believe that this is actually the phone is moving along Highway 26?
Yes, there were multiple records that had cell site location in that direction, west from her house.
Okay. I think we got that all squared away. So I want to just look at that one tower, then a couple more questions here. The one tower that's potentially servicing the public shooting range. You have some arms that look like they're sticking off of it. Before we get into that, is that indicating, like what you drew for us the other day, sort of the directionality of where the connection will be made to the phone?
Yes, so again, like my really bad drawing the other day showing kind of how the most cell site locations have three antennas, tri tower, and then the way that AT&T provides records is they give you the azimuth, which is going to be the direction of the antenna if we think about it from a 360 degrees. So this program tries to visualize that with those black arms. Essentially, it's saying, like, if we were to assume 160 degrees from either side of the azimuth, this is kind of the directionality or estimated coverage roughly of that sector or antenna.
And did you get any of these data transmissions that you talked about? Did any of those occur on the west side, sort of, and you can clarify exactly where, but on the west side of that tower that potentially covers the public shooting range?
Yes, the record at 10:39, the azimuth given for that is 315 degrees. So if we were to think about circle 0 being due north, and again 360 being back at due north, 315 would be, if the tower is this way, it's going to be facing in northwest direction,
Okay.
roughly.
And so with the pointer and pointing to that specific tower, can you kind of point in the direction that you believe that that 1039 transmission would have been coming from?
So that 315, let's go any further. 315 degree azimuth with 360 being north, 315 is kind of providing coverage down Highway 26 west.
Sort of in the direct direction of that public shooting range?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move to admit State's Exhibits 106 and 107.
No objection.
All right, 106 and 107 are admitted.
Yeah, okay. And I know you sort of talked about this. It's hard to take a snapshot of time.
Yes.
I think you've done a good job of describing how when you're seeing these data transmissions, that's clear that the phone is moving along Highway 26 at those times, at least in that general direction. But all these other dots that we're seeing on this map, especially the ones that are clustered, could you kind of just describe how you're determining or how you're deciding what to put on this map? Meaning, are you putting a dot for every data transmission or just times to indicate possible movement?
No, so this is a direct visual representation of these AT&T records. So each line in this document is visualized on this map. So the ones that have, again, those little kind of black arms, if we want to call them that, those are showing cell site locations. So like an actual cell site, they have antennas, and the arms kind of showing general directionality of that antenna. Whereas there are a few other little green dots on this map that don't kind of have those black arms sticking out from either side. Those are the NELOS, which we talked about last week, which is, AT&T's attempt, but again, it can go anywhere from 1,000 meters to 10,000 meters. But that's that data visualized also on that map. So I just wanted to be able to see everything: the AT&T NELOS and the AT&T cell site.
Okay, and so on those dots that don't have the arms, you're just not getting the information from those sort of indicating which direction or how far away from the tower it really is.
Yeah, so those dots are the AT&T NELOS points, where AT&T's NELOS just gives you the lat long and then like a accuracy estimator. So they don't have the accuracy estimator, but that's the latitude and longitude provided by AT&T. That's that exact point.
Okay, and I just want to make sure then we understand sort of the summary of that morning. You're detecting Nancy Brophy's phone starting around the area of her home, heading out Highway 26 into that area that we've been discussing by 10:39, and then by 11:08, it's heading back in the direction of her home,
Yes.
and eventually ends up back in the area of her home.
Yes.
And during that time, and the same thing the day before, it appears that Mr. Dan Brophy's phone was in the area of the Culinary Institute while Nancy's taking these trips out.
Yes.
Sorry, Your Honor, if I could just have one moment. Sorry. And Ms. Squay, sorry for the delay there. Looking over different maps here. Do you recall analyzing a previous time where you were able to track Nancy Brophy's phone on a particular morning into the area of the Oregon Culinary Institute sometime in May of 2018?
I was asked by Detective Merrill to kind of just look at phone activity for Saturdays, leading up to the day of the homicide.
Okay, and do you recall analyzing May 12th at around 7:30 in the morning? And if not, I can show you what I'm referring to.
May 12th, yes.
Was that a Saturday that you?
That was one of the Saturdays.
Okay, so we're talking about May 12th, 2018, a few weeks before the homicide. At around 7:31 a.m. on May 12th, 2018, were you able to determine where Nancy Brophy's phone was?
Could you repeat? I was looking, sorry.
I apologize, I should have given you a moment to look at your documents. On May 12th, 2018, at approximately 7:31 a.m., were you able to make a determination on where Nancy Brophy's phone was?
There was a data usage record for her phone number, and I believe that's recorded at the cell site, the Goose Hollow one, and as well as an ELOS record during that time as well.
Okay. You got both. You got that cell tower and you got that ELOS record indicating Nancy Brophy's phone was in the area of the Culinary Institute. I know we've been referred to as Goose Hollow Culinary Institute, but in that area, the same area that we've been discussing, at 7:31, Saturday, May 12, 2018, a few weeks before the homicide.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you, Ms. Blair.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Riley. Welcome back, Ms. Guay. So we talked about this a little bit before, but these records that AT&T, let's talk about that in particular since that's the carrier involved here. AT&T keeps those records essentially for billing purposes, do they not?
Billing, yes. Probably other AT&T features as well.
Okay. And the government, the federal government requires them to maintain or ascertain some more particular location accuracy, but only for a short period of time.
Yeah, I don't know the federal requirement on length of retention.
Okay. From the work that you've done, though, do you have a sense of about how long that is?
It depends on the carrier. So with AT&T specifically, NELOS records seem to be held longer than other carriers. I don't have like an exact time frame, but longer than the other three or two now.
Okay. So you started by talking about States Exhibit 100, and that's the one from December 24th of 2017. You recall that?
Yes.
And your testimony was that Mr. Brophy's phone was recorded at a cell site or was pinging off of a tower that was very close to his work location at Avamere.
Yes.
Do you have the underlying data for that report with you? You were testifying that it was about 8 p.m. and I'm wondering how much more specific you can be.
I don't have that one specifically printed off.
Okay.
That for the 24th, I don't have those AT&T records. There's like 3,000 pages of them, so I didn't print all of them. So.
Okay. So your testimony, I think, was that in the exhibit itself, 100, States 100, in the text, not on the graphic part of the exhibit, but in the text, you indicate that at approximately 8 p.m., the phone, and referring to Dan Brophy's phone, is recorded at a cell site that appears to provide coverage to their home.
There were multiple records kind of right around that 8 p.m. I believe they were probably all data transmissions. So they were, there's two right there near Avamere, and then there's obviously the one near their home, and those are all very close geographically speaking.
Okay, but from that note, is it fair to interpret that to mean that he was home at approximately 8 p.m.?
I don't know what time he walked through the door, because again, this is general location. So you could be driving in a car, and on your commute, uh, have cell site location records at multiple towers along your drive home. So again, I can't tell you exactly what time he got home, but he's in that general area leading up to and approximately after 8 p.m.
Okay, and is the data specific enough that you're able to tell when he left Avamere?
No.
So essentially, your testimony is that he's near both locations, close to 8 p.m. I was really having trouble trying to figure out.
So those 3 cell sites, the ones mentioned, are all very close geographically speaking. So he has records recorded at the 2 in that Avamere area, because Avamere, if I remember correctly, is kind of in between possibly 2 different cell sites, like we talked about the other day, where you could possibly see 2 different cell site locations, by being stationary, just given on where they're located. So he can have, if there's 6 hours of records kind of consistently hitting off of the same cell site locations, and then leading up to 8 p.m., there's, records kind of hitting in the direction of the home, that cell site. So again, it's like you could be driving, you could be, on your road home and hit off that location. So, or that cell site location.
Okay. Were you able to ascertain about how long it would take him to get from Avamere to their home?
I did not map that, no.
You, I believe, indicated that you conducted most of this analysis in 2020. Did I understand that correctly?
There were multiple times during this investigation when I was asked to do kind of follow-up investigation on this. I'm not if the report has a date, then it would be whatever on the date. Trying to find that first page.
Well, I was actually referring to what you just testified to.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But in your testimony just now, did I understand you correctly to say that you conducted that cell site location analysis in 2020?
So I conducted it multiple times from, I would say, 2019 through 2022. I went back and looked at records.
So, got another question for you about distance, having to do with the March 26th and 27th testimony in those exhibits. From that, let's see, could we see states 107? That's the one that would be most helpful.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you. I think we only have those on paper. So from the tower that is closest to that shooting range, what's the distance there? What's the drive time?
I don't know the drive time between the cell site base and the driving range or shooting range, excuse me.
Okay. Can you give us the mileage?
I looked at just purely linear distance, so distance from this location to distance of the, because signal doesn't have to drive. So I wasn't focusing on driving. I was focusing on signal.
Okay, but from the topography that you showed us on the other exhibits, this is a very mountainous area.
It is.
Really steep
Yes.
terrain. Okay. And what was that linear distance?
For that tower, I had it on the title of the image, so it was like 6.57 maybe. If you could pull up that one, we could just verify it. But for the topography,
Testifying before, maybe it was about that. You said 6.51.
there was 6.51. There was 6.57, and then there was a third tower. But again, if we just pull those up, it's in the name of the files. So
Okay, I don't have the numbers of the exhibits. I'd be happy to do that if you remember what the numbers are.
10, what was this 107? So probably 106, 105, 104, maybe.
It's 104. Okay, let's look at 104 then.
Yeah, so it's in the cell site. That would be roughly 6.57 miles between that little pin at the AT&T cell site location and the pin at the public range.
Okay, all right. So it's a little over 6.5 miles, almost 6.6.
Yes.
But that's linear again.
That's
that
again linear. Yes.
The way
linear.
you wouldn't have to drive through the hills. Okay. And for the transactions that you noted on that tower, and I think we probably do need to go back to 107 again. For the transactions that you noted, could you give us the times? Trying to figure out how long you were recording or seeing that AT&T had recorded activity there.
So the first one at specifically that cell site would be 1038. It would have been that eastward facing sector, which has an azimuth of 160 degrees. And then at 1039, there was another data usage record, and that was on the east or west northwest facing side, that 315 degree azimuth. And then there was the phone call at 1104, incoming phone call at 1104, also recorded on that same cell site, except this was on the where is 11? This was at the 160, so this would have been the eastbound facing sector, the 160 degree azimuth. So there's 3 records at that cell site, different sectors.
Okay, so your interpretation is if the topography or other things hadn't caused these transactions to go to a tower that was other than the closest, that she was traveling at 11:38 or 10:38, right past that tower, right?
Somewhere where it would have been providing coverage. I don't know exactly where along. Highway 26 is the main highway through that area, but all you have to be is somewhere within the coverage of the sector.
Okay, but then by 11:04, there was activity toward Portland again.
It was that, yes, west face or east facing sector.
Okay.
East side.
So the relevant time, if you're trying to ascertain distance from the shooting range, the relevant time is, what is that, about 25 minutes, 26 minutes?
There was 38 to 04, so yeah, 26 minutes of activity recorded in the vicinity of that cell site.
Okay, but the tower is, at least by linear distance, about 6.6, 6.5, and 6.6 miles away from the shooting range.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And then the other activity that you talked about was all moving further away from the shooting range, correct?
After 1104, correct.
Okay.
Back east into Portland.
And then, were you able to ascertain whether there was also activity on those days that was closer to Vernonia?
I'm not sure what you mean by closer to Vernonia.
Whether her phone was closer to Vernonia than this day that you're talking about right now? On the 26th and the 27th, in the analysis that you did, were there times that her phone was closer to Vernonia than you testified about?
These are all the records that show the phone traveling along 26. So there are no records at that cell site that was kind of located right near Vernonia for her phone on these dates.
On either the 26th or
Yes.
the 27th. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, redirect.
Don't believe so, Your Honor, but we are just double checking our.
Sure, go ahead.
And I think they all are, so we actually don't have any redirect.
All right. You can step down, and we'll take our lunch a little early. Let's plan on being back on the record at 1:30.
Okay, we'll go off record and I will mute the WebEx. All rise.